Hi, my name is Kayla. Henry and I did a missionary biography on Henry Martyn. So with Henry Martyn, he predominantly did ministry through 1780 to 1812. And something really cool about him is that he became a believer in his early 20s. And with that, it was his sister that actually led him to faith. So Henry was a scholar in a lot of ways. He really loved to study. But one thing that his sister noticed was, in her letters, she writes, I never expected, I never thought that you would do bad. When he was talking about the weight of school and pressure, she's like, I never thought that you would do bad, but what I am worried about is your relationship with God, and that I don't think you have one. And so she was very direct, very honest with him, because all of his thoughts and focuses were on school, and she was like, the spiritual state, I care really deeply about that. And her name was Sally. And so Sally continued to share with him through letters during this time period, and he slowly she started to get these letters back that talked with Henry Martyn being like, we need to be the light, and we need to be sharing. And it was through those letters that she was like, I think that Henry has repented and believed. And they finally got to be together during one of his breaks with school, and it was confirmed that he had repented and believed, he was now willing to follow Christ. And with that came this newfound desire to want to share the gospel. And so he didn't really know what it looked like with overseas missions, because this was when a lot of this was just starting for their time frame with Protestants. And so he heard about William Carey in India and thought, oh my goodness, I really have this desire and passion to go share with Indians. And he didn't share immediately. It took some time for him to figure out the time frame of moving all the way across the world when there was no airplanes, none of that. And so he finally got connected within a couple of years, and he went to India. And so, but along the way, there were some kind of, trouble problems, which would be, he had this love relationship with a woman named Lydia. And Lydia, the reason why, so the book that I did it about was called My Love Must Wait, and that's predominantly because he was sharing the gospel, and Lord did amazing things, but he never ended up with the love of his life. And so Lydia, they both equally liked each other back, but because he was shy in the beginning and wasn't as bold to propose to her immediately because he wasn't sure what she would say going to India, they ended up not being together. And Lydia's mom was avidly against it, not because of Henry, but because she said, you're not taking my daughter to India. And so they weren't able to be together, but they would correspond back and forth. And that would be a huge emphasis of his life, is that he wasn't able to be with her, but he always trusted in God's sovereignty and knew that God, your will be done. A big thing with Henry is his language skills. So Henry actually knew French, Latin, English, his native language. He knew Arabic, Persian, Urdu, and he really loved to use languages to share the gospel, but also with language translation. So his biggest accomplishments, part of the reasons why we remember the life of Henry Martyn, is because he was one of the first to make a New Testament translation of the Bible in Urdu, in Arabic, and Persian. And so this was a huge feat, and he worked with men from different ethnic groups, different language groups, to be able to form these New Testaments. And it's really cool because Henry's life was not one of mass conversions. It wasn't just a bunch of people coming here and there. It was a faithful life of sharing the gospel in the midst of difficulties. And so one thing that stands out about Henry's life when you read is his patience with people. He was very patient with all these different people from different backgrounds, including people from his own, when they didn't always see things eye to eye, when this was a big deal, being a missionary in this way during that time. He also had a very selfless love. He writes extensively in his journals how much he loves all of these people. and these people groups and his friends from different backgrounds and the random strangers he meets, and he really, really cared about them. Had a huge love for India, and in that love, he felt really, really comfortable in India. We don't have a whole lot of writings of Henry feeling, out of place there, but he began to feel God calling him to go to, Persia, modern day, like Iran. And at this point, there were no believers there. There also weren't missionaries. And so that's another reason, is though he was not in Persia for that long, he was one of the first Protestants to go. And so, like what the book said was that he was the first. Like he literally got on like a caravan and boats, and he went over. And so with that, something that was really cool was he was able to share in their heart language, because he had been studying those languages for years prior. So he got into the country, and people were amazed, like Muslims were amazed that he could debate them with theology in Arabic, in Persian, like all these languages. And so one thing with Henry, though, that was just like a change was that he started to experience intense health problems when he got to Iran. The first short period was fine, but over the long haul he started to get very sick, and this illness like nobody could really treat. He was also a little bit isolated since there was nobody there, no Christian community, and so he's trying to figure that out. But he got really, really sick, and ultimately he would die outside of Iran. He wanted to go back to England just to be with his friends and family, because he writes in his journals that he knew that he was getting sick. And so he did die. It says that Armenians actually gave him a funeral, and so he is buried in that area. But we remember his life because of his accomplishments with the New Testament through the work of the Holy Spirit. They say today that some of those translations, they have rhythms and rhymes that are very similar to the way that Henry wrote that part of the New Testament, and really trying to get it in their heart language. And a really cool story with just the gospel being in your heart language is so impactful is there was a man whose first language was Urdu, and they were sharing the gospel with him in Urdu, but he had all of these questions. He was really confused, and he said, I just don't know how I can believe in Jesus. And Henry said, okay, here, why don't you read this Bible, this New Testament that I've made? It's in Urdu, so you can read it. And so he ended up reading it, and later he came back that day after reading through all these passages of Jesus just very urgently, and he repented and believed and said, I've trusted in Jesus. And that man would go on to be a minister in India, sharing with his people group, and we have accounts of him sharing the gospel. And it was through what the Holy Spirit used in his heart language that Henry had devoted his life to. And so that's part of the reason why Henry Martyn is really celebrated, his sacrificial nature of, I could have it easy in England with a wife and family, and I am choosing to to help the Lord in sharing the gospel. And so that's Henry Martyn. He's really cool, and thank you for listening.